You're watching Outside as Israel is at war with Hamas. What could happen next is terrifying to contemplate. We'll chat to Richard Kemp in a second. How did Australia's political leaders respond? Well, first up, James, Peter Dutton was first off the block, or was certainly early off, with a strong condemnation of Hamas. James?
Yeah, and in fact, what he also said here, and it's really interesting to contrast what Peter Dutton has said versus Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese. Peter Dutton said not only do they have the right to hit back and, retaliate for this, but also to deter future attacks, which is a very, very strong key part. To say a strong attack means one that deters future attacks. Now, Anthony Albanese this morning kind of had to play cleanup and say, oh, well, Australia condemns the attack on Israel by Hamas. It's unprovoked and all of that. But this only came after Penny Wong said, oh, well, Australia condemns the attack, but we urge Israel to show restraint. Which is, of course, the thing that you would never, ever see them say about any other country in the world. As Lital said in the last segment, how would Penny Wong react if a music festival was attacked by terrorists and 20-somethings kidnapped and taken to a terrorist enclave? Obviously there would be no
being showing in the streets.
Of restraint. Except, though, you sometimes think that when you look at the left in Australia, they'd say, oh, well, maybe we deserved it. Maybe, why do they hate us? Because this is the same sort of self-hatred you see all the time out of the left when it comes to terrorism.
Well, I think it's often been said if the Palestinians would put down their guns, there would be peace. If Israel put down its guns, there'd be no Israel.
There would be genocide.
That is the reality.
Spot on. Now, let's go even deeper into this. He's a great friend of this show. He knows Israel very, very well. He's trained the SAS there. Colonel Richard Kemp, great to have you. Thanks for staying up in London to chat to us. Always good to see you. We didn't see this coming, and it didn't appear that the Israeli Defence Force or the Americans saw this coming. What happened, Richard?
Well, very clearly, it doesn't need me to say it, it was very clearly a failure of intelligence, which is extremely surprising from Israel, which has some of the finest intelligence services in the world and has particularly good coverage of the Gaza Strip. Well, clearly that was not good enough, because you can't possibly organise such a large-scale attack as this, involving dozens and dozens of fighters and hang gliders, bulldozers, and all the rest of it, and boats as well, without being able to, having to talk, communicate, and therefore lay yourselves open to intelligence penetration. Clearly, it didn't happen. I don't think we know why, but I've no doubt when the thing is dealt with, there will be very severe questions being asked.
Well, but Richard, this is something that has been troubling me ever since this started. We know that the only time Arab armies have had success against Israel have been during Jewish holidays, when soldiers are on break, when the guard is let down, and so on. And it's the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, 50th anniversary. So this would seem like they were really trying to make a very big statement here, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that it wasn't a coincidence. It was the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, and, as you say, on an Israeli holiday. But and also the Yom Kippur War embarrassed Israel by the intelligence failure around the invasion at that time, as indeed the terrorist attacks on the Twin Towers on 9/11 went without being noticed by intelligence. So unfortunately, these things do happen.
Rita?
Well, the Iranians are gloating. I think we've got here a tweet sent by Khomeini today saying that today the Palestinian youth and the Palestinian movement is more energetic, more alive and more prepared than it has been during the past 80 years. So the Iranians are unashamedly gloating about this. Can you tell me about their part in this and the fact that they appear to have been emboldened by the Biden administration? The regime there was isolated under the Trump administration, but now it's restoring relations with Saudi Arabia, and it's got this new deal where it's going to be the beneficiary of billions of dollars.
There's no question about Israel's about Iran's involvement here. Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the two major terrorist groups in Gaza, are both sponsored, trained, funded, directed by Iran. And so Iran's hand is most certainly behind this. And yes, you're right that Iran has been emboldened by the Biden administration, both by the appeasement of the Biden administration that released $6 billion of frozen assets back to Iran recently. And also, I think, you look at things like Biden's deliberate distancing himself from the current Netanyahu government. And, that would also encourage, I think, Iran to do this. But I think there's another hand behind this as well, and that's Russia. Because, of course, Russia and Iran are an axis of evil. And Iran has been helping Russia in Ukraine, supplying killer drones that have attacked Ukrainian civilians. And there's no doubt at all that Russia is involved in this, in my opinion. Both the Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorist leadership have been in Moscow in recent months. Hezbollah up in the north, not yet involved, but may become involved. They've also been in Moscow. They've also got a close relationship with Russia. So I think we've got to see Russia's hand as well behind it. And of course, this works well for Russia because, as with their fomenting of conflict in Azerbaijan and Armenia and in Serbia and West Africa, these conflicts in different parts of the world distract American political will and also American resources away from the main problem that Russia has today, which is Ukraine.
Richard, how did they get so many Hamas terrorists into Israel? You mentioned they went by air, by gliders, by boat. Just tell us a little bit about what we know about this operation.
Well, as I understand it, and of course things are changing and details are not entirely clear, but as I understand it, the boats that were attempted to be used were actually attacked by the Israeli Navy and didn't get anywhere. Didn't really play a part. The hang gliders, I believe there were some hang gliders used to fly over the fence and get into Israel. I don't know how many. But I think, as far as I can see it, the majority of those who got in went in on motorbikes and 4x4s after the fence had been bulldozed by Palestinians in Gaza. And I'm sure as well, I've heard it said also that there were some people involved in the attack who had infiltrated previously. In other words, probably Palestinians living in Judea and Samaria who had moved into that area, got through Israeli checkpoints, etc., probably with work permits, and moved into that area. So a combination of ways, a very sophisticated and horrific but extremely successful attack from the Palestinian point of view.
So sorry, James. Richard, does Bibi Netanyahu, what should he do now, in your opinion? They called the reaction Sword of Iron, that's the name of the operation. Should Netanyahu ignore all the hand-wringing left-wingers and just go back into Gaza, kick Hamas out of Gaza, reoccupy that territory? Should they do that, or what's the alternative?
Well, the first thing they've got to do, of course, is to deal with the current hostage situations, which exist, as far as I know, still within Israel. There are still hostages being held in Israel. And, of course, there are apparently large numbers of civilians and soldiers have been kidnapped and taken hostage into Gaza itself. So those immediate hostages have to be dealt with, I think, first. Meanwhile, the Israelis have been striking into the Gaza Strip, attacking terrorist infrastructure in Gaza from the air. But I do think, that probably will not be enough. That's been the response to Hamas rocket attacks in the past. But I think in response to this attack, Israel will have to go in with very, very significant force and spill a great deal of terrorist blood in Gaza. Now, whether that means they have to end up staying there is another question. But certainly they're going to have to go in there, I think, on the ground and be there for quite a long time. That's irrespective of whether they succeed in rescuing any or all of these hostages, which is, I think, a very big question that none of us can answer at the moment. But yeah, as you rightly say, ignore the hand-wringing left-wingers. I think also the governments around the world need to lend, in Australia, in Britain, in the US and elsewhere, need to really get behind Israel on this and not do the normal thing of once a few people get killed, then they try and prevail on Israel to stop, and they allow the anti-Israel propaganda to flow forth. If they really want Israel to deal with this situation, which I think most people really do, then they should not get on Israel's back. They should just give Israel every bit of support it needs.
Absolutely, James.
And finally, Richard, very quickly, is it time for the U.S. and the Western powers to say enough dealing with Iran, restore full sanctions on that regime, and treat it like a terrorist state again, and stop trying to make some sort of peace deal with it?
Absolutely, and that should have been the case. That was the case under the Trump administration. He pulled out of the deal. He sanctioned Iran much more heavily than it had been before. And that's what should be happening now. And you know, I suspect Biden probably won't do that, but that's exactly what he should do. Iran should be held, as I mentioned as well, Russia also, but Iran certainly should be held directly responsible for this attack and treated like the pariah it is.
Richard Kemp, always great to chat to you. Thanks so much. And to get your insights, obviously we know you have many friends in Israel, and our thoughts are with them. Hope they stay safe.